Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for the introduction. I'm very honored to present Korea's views and the current stages of the negotiation to you today at this meaningful event. Actually, I'm Deputy Director General for Climate, Energy, Environment, and Scientific Affairs Bureau of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Korea. Actually, I think I am maybe the only person from our government who participated from the UNEA 5 and our open-ended working group in Senegal and INC 1 and INC 2. So, but I am just a career diplomat, a negotiator, not a science expert on plastics. So bear with me on the substantive issues. So actually, many speakers before me already explained the background of this international legally binding instrument on plastic pollution. So my presentation may be a little bit duplicative, so you might feel a little bit tired of, but I would like to give more detailed explanation on the process of the negotiation. First, on the background, that there has been warning from science community and international organizations for quite a long time, even before we adopted the UNEA Resolution 5/14 last year. So, as many people already mentioned, UNEP designated that was my mistake, but not the plastic pollution, but the environment pollution, along with climate crisis and loss of biodiversity as a triple planetary crisis threatening the humanity. And there have been quite a few significant reports from many research centers and international organizations like Pew Research Center and the Science Journal, UNEP, and OECD. They've published very significant reports on plastic pollution. So based on this scientific evidence, the government delegates gathered at the UN Environment Assembly discussed about the ways how we can reduce the plastic pollution in the world. But then actually the government delegates failed several times, and finally, as our executive secretary explained, early last year at the UNEA 5.2, we adopted this very significant UNEA Resolution 5/14. The name is End Plastic Pollution Towards an International Legally Binding Instrument. So people expected that now we are going to negotiate a kind of the kind of plastics legally binding instrument, which could be the parallel to the climate Paris Agreement. So this resolution, the resolution was originally drafted by Peru and Rwanda in 2021. Actually, the Peru and Rwanda, they are still the chair of the High Ambition Coalition. So they are the front runners on this issue. And Republic of Korea, we joined as one of the co-sponsors in this resolution in November 2021, and UN members adopted this resolution last year at the UNEA 5.2. And you might be a little bit wondering that why we already talk about several key elements in this convention, because the Resolution 5/14 already included the key elements of the international legally binding instrument in the resolution. So the resolution already mandated that the UN member states to draft international instrument which covers the entire life cycle of plastic and both the terrestrial and marine plastic pollution. And the resolution clearly states that the elements, the instrument, the legally binding instruments should include the elements such as sustainable consumption and production, both production design and waste management, and plastics in marine environment, and national action plans, share best practices, monitoring and reporting, capacity building, technology transfer, financial arrangement, and multi-stakeholder participation in that resolution. So based on that mandate, the national delegates, the delegates are negotiating the draft international legally binding instrument for the 5 sessions of INCs. And then we are going to discuss the objectives, structure, and protection elements of the instrument. And as you already know, that Korea expressed our wish to host the last INC next year, and we were decided as the host of INC 5 at the last meeting in Paris. So in the first session of INC, which was held in Punta del Este, Uruguay, last November, about 25,000 representatives from around 160 member states and various stakeholders convened, and that was some pictures from there. And we discussed agendas like scope, objectives, structure, core obligations, control measures, means of implementations, monitoring, reporting, scientific and technical cooperation, stakeholder participation, and sequencing and clustering. What I mean by this is that at the first meeting, all those participating governments, we made a general statements. So we expressed their general views on the legally binding instrument on plastic pollution with this, on these specific topics, on these specific issues. So from that general discussion, we've realized that the main key issues, I mean, we found some differing views. So some countries, like EU, Norway, and others, they advocated global common binding rules, which is more of the top-down approach, while some others, like the US and some other countries, they preferred country-driven voluntary measures, so-called bottom-up approach. So we have these different preferences among those delegates. And developing countries, they asked for strong support for financial and technical support for developing countries. For example, the informal sector, such as waste pickers who might lose their job when we make the transition to without the plastic pollution. And for the key definition of key terms, they decided to defer that discussion until later times. So based on national statements of parties, at the INC 1, the government delegates, we decided that to ask the Secretariat to prepare the options paper for each key element which would be included in the convention. So the Secretariat prepared the options paper, circulated the paper, and we met in Paris last month. So at the headquarters of UNESCO in Paris, President Macron sent a video message, very strong video message, to encourage the delegates to make progress on this issue. So around 1,700 representatives from member states and various stakeholders convened, and we discussed. At the second meeting, we made 2 breakout groups. At the contact group 1, which was led by our DG Kim, who are sitting here, from our Minister of Environment. We discussed objectives, goals, and core obligations, control measures, primary plastic polymers, problematic avoidable plastic products, and so on, more on the substantive issues. In contact group 2, we discussed on means of implementations and like how we are going to actually implement these ways to end plastic pollution, such as national action plans, financial arrangements, technical cooperation, capacity building, and so on. So from the second meeting, but actually the substantive discussion was a little bit delayed because of the contention, because of the very hard contention on the draft rules of resolution, draft rules of procedure. The rules of procedure was still not adopted formally, so we are provisionally applying the draft rules of procedure. Some of you might have seen me in the news speaking on this issue. The main problem was that some countries, they strongly objected to make a decision with voting, without the consensus. So they objected to apply this draft rules of procedure, which we've already discussed and agreed in Dakar, Senegal last year. So we have discussed and made conclusion that we are going to leave this interpretation on this draft rules of procedure. And then on options for elements, contact group 1 and contact group 2, we had very hard negotiation and closed the meeting by asking the chair, with the support of Secretariat, to prepare a 0 draft text for consideration at the next meeting in Nairobi. So this is the current stage of negotiation, and I would like to briefly introduce Korea's perspectives on this issue on international legally binding instrument on plastic pollution. Korea's basic stance on the negotiation is that we would like to contribute to the international efforts to tackle plastic pollution as global pivotal state. And Ministry of Foreign Affairs, in close coordination with relevant ministries, Ministry of Environment, Ministry of Trade, Industry, Energy, and Ministry of Oceans and Fisheries, we are closely cooperating to formulate a national position and strategy. And we are also closely cooperating with the stakeholders, like civil societies and industries, businesses. So we've already had multiple rounds of hearings and meetings with business and with stakeholders. But still, this meeting today would be another big opportunity to hear your view on these issues, and so we are ready to incorporate your views in our Korean government's position. Or you can also reach Ministry of Foreign Affairs or Ministry of Environment anytime with your views on this issue. And then we would like to assess potential impact on domestic industries, as Korea is the main plastic producer country, And we are one of the main exporters of plastic products. So we are carefully assessing the impacts on our business and our society as a whole. So our Korea's position on the key elements of the instruments. Overall, we support having measures to manage plastics in a sustainable manner throughout the full life cycle, including production, consumption, and treatment of their waste. And as core obligations on primary plastic polymers, we do support reducing the production of plastic polymers to a sustainable level. And we also hope to develop a possible obligation that can reflect parties' national circumstances. For example, by including the nationally determined commitments or targets. But we do not support having a uniform trade measures on primary plastic polymers, because this is not a trade treaty, this is not a trade convention. So this is more on focusing on reducing and ending the plastic pollution. For the regulation on problematic and avoidable plastic products, we support establishing criteria to determine or prioritize problematic and avoidable plastic products, such as single-use plastics or short-lived plastics. In our previous session, some of the audience asked about the plastic consumption side, how we can reduce plastic pollution plastic consumption. So we strongly support that we can start by adopting some criteria on the single-use, the problematic and avoidable plastics. That means the single-use plastics or short-lived plastics could be the priorities in our endeavor to end plastic pollution. However, the regulation on plastic pollution should not be arbitrary. The regulatory measures, such as banning, phasing out, and reducing plastics, should be based on scientific evidence. And in order to accelerate and support our transition to less plastic or zero plastic pollution, we strongly support incentivizing research and development of sustainable additives, substitutes, and and promote bioplastics and biodegradable plastics. On means of implementation, I just mentioned the financial arrangement. The Korean government prefers promote private investment and utilizing the existing financial mechanisms, such as Global Environment Fund, rather than establishing a new financial mechanism. And last but not least, as you already mentioned, that we wanted to contribute to this process by hosting hopefully the last INC in Korea in late fall, maybe November next year. We haven't decided on the venue. Mayor Oh already left, but Seoul or several other local governments are already contacting us. So we are going to establish a committee on reviewing the venue of the INC next year. So we would like to ask for your continued attention and support for Korean government's endeavor to address the plastic pollution and our efforts to contribute to this process. This concludes my presentation. Thank you very much.
네, 감사합니다.